I am Daniel Lucas, and welcome to Book 101. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest. He has 10 years' experience in travel writing, fiction writing, content creation, creative strategy, marketing, and project management. No other than Mr. Douglas Weissman.
Hi, thanks for having me. You said it better than I could.
Welcome to Book 101, Mr. Douglas. As usual, can you please introduce yourself?
Absolutely. So I'm Douglas Weissman or Doug Weissman, depending on how well you know me. And I was born and raised in the Los Angeles area, California, but I've traveled around the world, been to nearly 50 countries. So my goal is to get to 50 before I'm 40. I work as a travel writer. I've also published 8 books. My ninth book is due out in April. And so I have a lot of experience writing fiction, travel writing, and just enjoying the stories that we create.
Yes, enjoy the books that Mr. Douglas are offering. So, how do you begin your writing process?
Well, it's difficult because I have a 4 year old. So my writing process is never at the same time each day, but I am able to kind of dig into the swing of things by either, if I'm working creatively in fiction, I can put on a song, the same song on repeat. And if that's not working, I will literally write the same paragraph from Ernest Hemingway's A Farewell to Arms over and over again until I feel like I got the rhythm for my own work. And then I'll move on to start writing my own stuff. And those two things, believe it or not, help me. Otherwise, if I'm doing my travel writing work, I have to sit in the chair at mostly the same time, drop my daughter off, come home, sit in the chair with a mug of tea, which I always have on hand, including right now, and just go. That one's more ingrained. It's kind of the habit perform becomes the ritual.
Do you prefer writing in silence or with background noise, and why?
Honestly, I don't mind either way. The only time background noise becomes a problem for me is when it's directed to me, right? So if I'm in a cafe, I love it. I love people talking. I love the sound of the espresso machine buzzing. But if somebody starts talking directly to me, then I can't ignore that and I'm drawn out. But otherwise, silence is fine. Music is fine. Ambient noise is fine.
You're versatile.
Yeah.
So, how do you overcome writer's block?
I usually go for a walk. That's the biggest one for me because writer's block happens. Sometimes I'm just stuck. I focus on something too hard and I can't kind of see the forest through the trees. So I go for a walk. Luckily, my dog always reminds me that it's time for a walk each day. So that helps me pull myself out of that space and make sure that I can kind of reset and recharge from a different perspective.
Yes. So, what tools or software do you find indispensable for writing?
Honestly, I'm a little minimalist and old school, so if I just have a Microsoft Word doc open or a Google Doc open, that's all I need. I don't personally believe that anything else helps me. Those tools that shut off the internet don't help me because sometimes I need to do research and then I'm stuck. Or tools that kind of keep the distractions away, I don't necessarily find help me because then I might be worried about my daughter needing to get in contact or something like that. School needs to contact me. So I find that I'm just better focused if I leave things up, but I have the doc just taking over my screen. It's all I'm looking at, all I'm focused on.
How do you incorporate feedback into your revisions?
That's a great question. Feedback's always very subjective, so it's difficult. I have to look at what I'm trying to do, look at what the majority of people are seeing as not working, and see where those overlap. And also what my intentions are versus what the person offering feedback's intentions are, because sometimes they don't overlap. One time I was talking to an agent, and this was with my previous book, Life Between Seconds, years ago before it was published, naturally. And he said he really liked the work, but he wanted me to remove all the magical realism from the book. And I just wasn't ready to do that. I wanted it in there for a lot of different reasons, and I love magical realism being one of those reasons. But he said, okay. And that was just part of the feedback process. And he wasn't really able to work with me because I didn't take that note. And that was fine. I got the book published eventually anyway. But it's just understanding why I want to do something. Does it actually help the story? Where does it help the story? And if I can answer those things, then I could leave something alone. If I get a note and I'm seeing, oh, this will actually better the story for these reasons, then I can't be so precious with my work that I don't respect and expect things to change.
Very well said, Mr. Douglas. So, what is your strategy for dealing with criticism of your work?
Hmm. I don't know if I have a strategy for dealing with criticism for my work. Actually, I mean, ignore it as much as possible is always at the top of my mind. Most writers that I admire generally say that they don't read the comments or criticisms, but in this day and age, it's practically impossible, especially when you have, hopefully hundreds or thousands of people's reviewing your book on Amazon or on Goodreads or on Barnes and Noble or these other book marketplaces. So it's difficult to avoid. I try to avoid it as much as possible, but just coming back to that space of going for a walk, pulling myself out of that headspace is necessary if there's a negative review somewhere along the line, especially if the review seems to be correlated with nothing about writing, right? So if somebody says the writing is off or the rhythm or it didn't like this character, you know what? That's fine, totally subjective. But if it's something along the lines of uh, that they just missed something completely that was obvious and glaring in the story, then that just makes me upset. Like it makes me mad as opposed to just like, okay, that's their opinion, I get it. And I think that's harder for me to overcome.
Yes, last week I have an interview about the author, and we talk about the reviews of her books. And one of the reviews is complaining about the retailers, not the book itself. And
Yeah,
he gave a bad review just because the book is late coming to her. So I told to the author, it's unfair. It's really unfair as an author.
yeah,
It's
that's
not
exactly it.
outside the writing. So, Mr. Douglas, do you set a specific goals for your writing sessions?
Sort of. The goal changes naturally, but usually for my writing session, again, this comes back to having a 4-year old. And sometimes, most of the time, at the end of the day, I just don't have the mental capacity to sit there for an hour or 2 hours, or do I have the energy and the time to sit there for an hour or two to write? So, what I started doing during the pandemic was I was set a 10-minute timer, and I would just see how much I could get done within 10 minutes. And that has carried over because I'm still just as tired. I still have just as many projects. I mean, she's 4 now, but she was only two, she was only one around, give or take, when the pandemic started, 1.5 when I started the process. So it's been a few years now that I've been doing the 10-minute timer thing. But the goal can be, how many words can I get in this 10 minutes? Or can I complete an entire scene in these 10 minutes? Or maybe I'll have a prompt that I'll have to do within those 10 minutes. So the goal always changes, but the 10 minutes generally remains the same.
What role does research play in your writing process?
It definitely has an important impact. For example, my new book coming out in April called Girl in the Ashes takes place during World War II in occupied Paris. So I definitely had to do a lot of research to make sure that certain things were accurate. When certain things that are definitely quantifiable, like, oh, when did Germany invade France and enter Paris? What kind of clothing did they wear? Who was in charge of this specific hospital at this time? what gas rations or food rations were like at the time. All those things are documented and easily researched. But if I get it wrong, that can impact somebody's read of the story. Where the other things of, well, I'm making up this character, I'm making up this life. Maybe I'll base it on a real person, or maybe I'll base it on somebody I know. We're not that needs less research naturally, but all of those little details, those finer details that help create this world are necessary. And I would say it took me maybe a year, 10 months to a year of just straight research before I felt comfortable diving in and reading or writing that book specifically.
Very well said, Mr. Doug. But before we go on, I want to shout out to the people listening to my ranking tops in the last 40 days, because in Bhutan I got number 6 on the Apple chart, Taiwan at 34, Jamaica at 56, Cameroon at 68, Thailand at 97, South Africa at 115, Cambodia at 114, and a lot more. Thank you so much for supporting this podcast, because this podcast is created to empower writers all over the world like Mr. Douglas Weissman. So, Mr. Douglas, do you prefer to write a specific time of day? And if so, when?
I wouldn't say I prefer a specific time of day, but I would say I have fallen into a specific time of day. So when I first started writing Life Between Seconds, my book that came out in 2022, I was writing during the day. I would have 2, 3 hours to sit at a cafe and just power through and get so much done and feel great and drained at the end of the day. But then as life evolves and I evolved and things change, I didn't have that ability to do that anymore, especially with a wife, a kid, a different day job, all these things. So I started writing at night, and it's not necessarily late. And again, that 10-minute timer makes me focus real quick and dive right in real quick. So it's usually around between 7 and 8:30 that I'll do writing now.
How do you stay motivated during long projects?
That's a good question. I think it's just this endless desire to see it through. Shiny object syndrome is always there and difficult. That idea where, oh, I love this idea and I get started on the project, and then halfway through, oh, but there's this new idea that I want, and that's really calling me. But I just got to put those aside. Those ideas, I'll write them down, and I know it's there for when I'm ready to go back to it. And sometimes I've finished a project, gone back to those ideas, and thought, oh yeah, that's not a great idea. So I'm glad I didn't pursue that and trade off what I eventually finished for this new one. But it's staying motivated is all for me about that personal goal, that personal justification, and also knowing that no one else is going to do it for me. I can't expect someone else to finish that book, so I have to do it.
Do you plan your story argument from start to finish before writing, or do you let it evolve?
I definitely let it evolve. I am not a planner. I Even when I try to plan, the first 5 books that I wrote, 6 books that I wrote, were all needed to be outlined. I was contracted by a publishing company. I had an understanding of kind of where the books were going in a bit of a way, at least from book one, and I had to send them an outline for each book so they knew that I had an idea. And it's somewhat evolved from those outlines, but not by much. Where the other books that I've written I've felt have been far more organic and felt more authentic because they were able to move at the whims of the characters' decisions to reach the ultimate outcome, as opposed to feeling like I was navigating through a structure that should have or could have changed because the characters evolved better into something different, into something more connective and engaging and emotional.
Very well said, Mr. Doug. So, how do you handle distractions while writing?
I handle them poorly, I think. Distractions when I'm writing come in so many different forms. My dog is very vocal and will whine, especially if it's about 10 a.m. my time and she decides that she wants a walk, or my daughter running in to show me a doll, or my wife needing help reaching something because she's short and I'm taller. But so you just never know where and when it's going to come. The hardest part for anybody is always just getting back into the groove of writing. I think that 10 minute for me, that 10 minute timeline is so important because it also means that if I tell them, or at least if I tell my wife, my 4 year old, she's 4, so she doesn't know how long 10 minutes is. But if I tell my wife and I set a timer uh, and it's towards the end of the night, she knows, okay, no distractions. I'm not going to go. She'll occupy my daughter, our daughter, for that 10 minutes. It's easy to occupy a kid for 10 minutes as long as you don't tell them that you need to be alone for 10 minutes. And that's helpful, but it's so difficult in the moment to feel like you're ever going to get that time back. And I think that's what stresses me out the most. And possibly a lot of writers, that idea of once distracted, you're never going to get back into the zone, but you will. And kind of giving yourself that grace and understanding and the time to get back, to get sucked back into things is really important. There was a story that Gertrude Stein, I don't know if it's true or not, but I like it, so I want it to be true. Gertrude Stein used to write in the car while her partner was shopping. And so it's just that idea where if you train yourself enough to focus whenever you have the chance to focus, then you could write anywhere, anytime, even after a distraction gets you.
Certainly, certainly, Mr. Dog. So, what techniques do you use to enhance your vocabulary and writing style?
Ooh, I don't think that I have ever enhanced my vocabulary. And the more I try to use words that I don't normally use, I think I use them wrong and then they sound terrible. But one of the things that I love is poetry to enhance my creative fiction writing. And the reason is because it's the rhythm, it's the sound of a word, where poetry allows poetic license. You can use disparate images to explain something that people generally don't let you get away with in fiction. And I've actually had debates with editors on books because I felt that the way I was talking about something was far more poetic and interesting than the way that they wanted me to do it. And so even if you're not a fan of poetry, I feel like the way that they choose words matters because of the sound half the time more than the meaning of the word. And I liked that, and I fall into that camp where I will use a word that I like the sound of even if it's not the best word for the meaning, because I think it feels more powerful in that space. And sometimes I have to justify it, sometimes it is just not going past editors and they, no matter what they say. But I think that it enhances my writing. I think that it helps me with the way that I reread things, because then I'll get into a rhythm and I'll see that the language is there, and that always I always come back to that.
Very well said, Mr. Douglas. But before we go on, I'm inviting you to listen to my other podcast, people. Food 101, our fourth season with Chef Alessandro, one of the best executive chefs in one of the five-star restaurants in downtown Toronto. Please do listen to our latest episode. We talk about Ossobuco and Polenta. It's all about our Food 101, Volume 12, Italian cuisine. Plus one more. Our books are out. Not only one, but 13 volumes, people. Food 101, Volume 1, Basics. Until 13 is only the books that you need. How to create a delicious food. Available on Amazon and leading online bookstores worldwide. So, Mr. Dog, how did you balance between being descriptive and being concise?
I will opt on being descriptive any day of the week over concision. I am not a concise writer, and I know it. That's why I don't write short stories. But I mean, speaking of Asabuco and Polenta, one, it makes my mouth water, but two, it's the exact type of thing that I would put into my story, because I think food is a cheat code where anytime you can write about food, it gets people immediately engaged because you're talking about sensory details they understand, the flavor of something, the smell of something, the sound of something. And I think that sensory details like the way something tastes or sounds or smells is far more interesting than the way something looks. And it gets people more engaged when describing it that way. So I will take 4 pages describing a dinner instead of 1 page to tell people that the dinner looked large. No, I want them immersed. I want them there. I want them tasting the food. And I don't care how long it takes because they're more likely, in my opinion, to stick around to see what I'm going to describe next. And
Definitely describe the food, how delicious it is. In what ways do you seek out inspiration for your writing?
oh, in so many ways. I mean, I find inspiration everywhere. I think it's one of the joys of just keeping my eyes open. I love I guess this sounds creepy, but I love sitting in a restaurant or a cafe and overhearing what people are talking about. And sometimes that becomes inspiration for a conversation in my story. I love going to gardens, going hiking, because that way my mind just looks out. I'm more present, and then I connect things because I'm not seeking answers. They just come to me in that way. Reading, I love reading. I love movies. Let me just say, I also hope that any writers out there also love reading because why are you trying to write a book if you're not reading books, right?
Yes,
But those are the
definitely.
things that keep me engaged. And cooking, I am not a great cook. I freely admit that I'm not a great cook, but I love food. And I also think that food brings people together. And so when I have the opportunity to try new food or to share food with new people, I always find inspiration there too.
Well done, Mr. Dog. So, how do you prioritize projects when working on a multiple pieces?
Usually, deadline is the thing that I prioritize the most. So, if I have a deadline, the earlier the deadline, that one's getting prioritized. But for those who don't have deadlines that seem to be working on multiple pieces, I also find that when I finish one piece, I have to put it aside because I can't finish a piece and revise the piece right away because I'm still in it. So it's a perfect time for me to then go to another piece and start working on that, whether writing it or revising it. Then, when I'm sufficient in that space, I'll go back to the other piece to review it, to revise it. And kind of going back and forth like that lets me come with fresh eyes to both things. So I can see, oh, this isn't working. Why did I think about this? Or, oh, there's a big gap here that needs connection. How am I going to fix these things? Because I'm no longer in that space. And this is a thing I see with a lot of writers, including myself. I know the world so well that I forget to include things because it's in my head, but it's not on the page. And if it's not on the page, readers aren't going to know it exists. So I have to go in and put those things back in, realizing that they weren't there now that I've had sufficient time and space. Otherwise, I just build those bridges on my own and don't realize it.
Yes, well done. So, Mr. Dog, what advice will you give to someone struggling in their writing?
Well, that's a hard one because there's different types of struggle in the writing. Is it an inspiration issue? Is it a focus issue? Is it a timing issue? I would come back to the thing that helped me when I was having trouble writing. And well, it's two things. One, always build character and give yourself 10 minutes. And the reason those two things work for me is if you have a character that you are connected to and you have built and that you understand that they are essentially their own person now, you know what's in the refrigerator, you know if they're going to choose to go left or right at the stop sign. The reason it works so powerfully is because you could take that character and put them in any situation and you understand how they're going to react. So you have a story no matter what happens because you know this person so well. And then if you're struggling with timing, if you're struggling with focus, if you're struggling with getting your story done even though it's all up here, you give yourself 10 minutes and you set a timer, no more than 10 minutes, no less than 10 minutes, because in 10 minutes you don't have time to sit there and judge yourself. You don't have time to let that inner critic say it's going to be bad because you only have 10 minutes. So you just sit there, you write anything and everything that comes into your head. Maybe give yourself a prompt like, here's my character in a restaurant with their partner or with their child, and what happens next. And just something that simple in 10 minutes, you're no longer sitting there thinking, I have to get 500 words down today, or I have to complete this scene. It takes the pressure off and it makes it a little more fun and it makes it a little more playful, even though you're still doing the same thing, but you're no longer just in that pressure cooker that you create for yourself.
Well done, Mr. Doug. So, what are your short term and long term goals in writing?
Well, short term goals, definitely marketing my new book, Girl in the Ashes, which comes out April 16th. It is available for pre order now, anywhere books are sold, whether it's Amazon, bookshop.org, or Barnes and Noble. Hopefully, it'll get in Target. My last one did, so we'll see about that too. But just anywhere and everywhere you can find it. That's definitely a short term goal. But long term goal is just to continue writing. I made a list the other day that I have 16 novel ideas that has at least one page connected to it. So it's just one page of whether it's notes or whether it was an interesting page that I thought was great and creative and inspiring at the time. So I have 16 of those. So long-term goal would be to at least do those 16 novels, but maybe there's more coming because there's always more ideas.
Yes, more coming, people. So, let's talk about your upcoming novel, Girl in the Ashes. How did you craft it?
Yeah, that was an exciting one. My wife was the one who came up with the idea because we were really into the show Dexter at the time, and I'd never seen it, and it was one of her favorites. So we were watching it together. And for anybody who hasn't seen Dexter, it's about a serial killer with a moral code. And we thought, well, what if there was a serial killer, but in World War II Paris? And so I kind of ran with that idea. There's a serial killer, she's a female, but rather than us doing that cat and mouse game where you follow a detective or some police entity looking for the serial killer, I thought it would be far more interesting if we followed the serial killer. So the story is about Odette and her not only ability to hide what she's doing within the chaos of war, but also why is she doing it? Who is she protecting? Who's protecting her? And then how her experience kind of opens the floodgates to more harm rather than safety.
Yes, Girl in the Ashes. What behind the title of your late upcoming novel?
Yeah, well, that is an interesting one. One, I love that title. I was very proud when I came up with it. But part of the reason for that title is because Odette, this is not a spoiler. You learn very quickly about this. So I just want everybody to know I'm not spoiling anything. Odette, as I mentioned, is a serial killer, and she hides the victims of her bodies, or excuse me, the bodies of her victims. She hides the bodies of her victims in pottery. So she removes all the limbs, throws them all into a kiln, and boils it down basically, or excuse me, that's not the process. The process is she removes all the limbs, kind of gets everything going, melts everything down, and then also uses the bones within the clay to make the pottery. So it's kind of very sustainable in a way. But that's where it came from. Girl in the Ashes is because of the bone dust and the creating the pottery out of the bones and these types of things.
What inspired you to write this novel?
Uh, well, hopefully not a serial killer who hides bones in pottery, but it was just I've always had a fascination for World War II history. My grandparents, so my grandfathers, both my mother's father and my father's father, were stationed in the Pacific Theater during World War II. My grandmother, one of my grandmothers, also worked as a army secretary during World War II. And I'm Jewish, so I've always had this, I'm going to say, morbid fascination with the Holocaust. And because I grew up knowing so many Holocaust survivors and so many family members affected by the Holocaust and all of these things, that it's just kind of inescapable, and it's part of my heritage and my lineage. So kind of putting it from a different perspective and putting it with a different twist to get, I think, more people involved, I thought it was a bit of a Trojan horse, where how can we get people more interested and understanding of what actually took place there? Well, true crime's really popular. Serial killers are really interesting. And when my wife said, "Oh, I wonder what would happen if there was a Dexter character doing this in Paris," I just rolled with it.
Well done, Mr. Dog. So, can you describe the research process you undertook for the storyline of Girl in the Ashes?
That was it was so broad, honestly. I was researching anything and everything that had to do with in and around kind of France, World War II time. And the truth is, I needed to narrow it down because it became too much. There's so much out there. But one of the books that really helped me was, I don't remember the author, but it was called I think it was When Paris Went Dark was the title. And it was just all about this timeline when the German occupation happened. And it just so rich in the information of what it was like, of even the way that citizens had to use the lottery tickets to buy meals and things like that, how many tickets would be worth something. And it was just incredibly detailed. I was able to get a nice chunk of information out of that. But then some of the details I needed weren't in there. So I would have to check out gigantic stacks of books from the library, and only to find the information on one detail I was looking for. But it came out worth it in the end.
So, who are your literary influences, and did any of them impact this work, Girl in the Ashes?
I would say that Nicole Krauss is definitely one of my influences. I love her books. She always comes with this kind of, I don't know how to say it. There's this type of whimsy that she has in her books that isn't necessarily magical, and it's not necessarily lighthearted, but it feels uplifting in a way. And so her novel, History of Love, is one of my favorites of all time. And I always feel like I come to stories with that, or I want to come to stories at least with that sense of whimsy, just something that's left of center. It's a different perspective, such as this being from a serial killer's point of view, or my other book, Life Between Seconds, where there's this magical realism aspect. So just something it's never straightforward, and it's never what you expect. So no, Nicole Krauss is definitely one, and Tom Robbins is another, and he's another similar. You never know what you're going to get with him, and the way that he comes to stories. He hasn't written in a while, but he's still alive as far as I know. So, but uh, I love their work, and Catherine Dunn similarly. She wrote Geek Love. She has a new book out. She passed away a few years ago, but I think her recent book was published post mortem. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but Geek Love just blew my mind when I read it. I mean, it was so different. I'd never read anything like it before, and it was the first book that I read where I thought, you can do that.
Yes, indeed, you can do that. So, how do you approach character development in The Girl in the Ashes?
I am definitely one for interviewing my characters. I will sit there. I will literally ask them questions like I'm interviewing them, like you are with me, and to get as many answers as I can to get a better understanding. And then when I have that, I mean, I just do the thing that I mentioned earlier. I will put a character in a room and with a prompt that just is something silly, like, oh, they have a rug, a frying pan, and their next door neighbor all in a room. What happens? And so I have to use the rug and talk about it. I have to use a frying pan for something, and I have to engage with the neighbor in some way. And now I have 10 minutes to write this scene. What's going to happen? And it helps me understand the character better, in this case Odette better, because I'm just giving her motion and movement and making her react and act on her own based upon what I know from the interview. And some things change. Some things I'm like, oh, so she doesn't actually like dogs, she actually is a cat person or something. But it's just those little things can really flesh out someone, where even if it doesn't make it into the story directly, it makes them feel more depth and more richness.
Yes, richness. So, what was the most challenging part of writing process of Girl in the Ashes?
Well, I wrote most of it. So Girl in the Ashes is about 90-95% written in those 10-minute sprints. So I think the most challenging part for that story was one, doing all the research, but then getting that book finished in those 10 minutes. I mean, it was 6 days a week, 10 minutes for 2.5, 3 years. But it got it done.
Yes, and congratulations, Mr. Doug. So, what message or theme did you hope readers will take away from the Girl in the Ashes?
Ooh, well, hopefully it's not killing people. That would be a terrible one. But I think it's just that idea. I mean, there's a very, I don't want to say generic idea about World War II fiction of just kind of the lessons that should be learned, but the parallels across the world are pretty clear, especially with what's going on in the Middle East or what's going on in Russia and Ukraine, or it's just that idea of othering people. And it's not, there's not this big jump between othering people at the beginning, leading down to a Holocaust. It's the banality of evil, the fact that most of the people were normal, regular, everyday parts of family, parts of this and that, parts of the fabric of community and life that ended up doing or being a part to of or privy to this atrocity that wasn't just 6 million Jews. It was also a large percentage of Romani. It was also LGBTQI plus communities. I mean, it's just when you other anyone, it's so easy to then distance yourself from them as people. And it's not that that is the main message I was working with, but it's clear to see how quickly it devolves.
Yes, very well said, Mr. Doug. So, how do you feel about adaptation of your work, be it in film, TV, or theater?
I'm all for it. Let's bring it. Anybody out there that wants to do it, let me know.
Yes, people, let's bring Girl in the Ashes in a series or a movie or a film. Okay, so please do reach out to Mr. Douglas Weissman. And speaking of movies, I'm promoting my book. No, movie 101 review. Please do listen to my latest episode. I interviewed the executive producer of Hope Studios. They're producing a good movie this coming April called The Hopeful, Emmy award winning director. So please do listen to my latest episode, Movie 101 review. So, Mr. Douglas, what your taken of self-publishing this versus traditional publishing?
I don't know if I necessarily have a take in terms of if one's better than the other. I know I prefer traditional publishing just because I've seen what self publishing takes. And I mean, you just have to do it. You have to be everything when you self publish. I think that one of the misconceptions that writers have about self publishing is how easy it is. Well, yes, it's easier to get your book on a platform such as Amazon, but it doesn't mean it's easy to get people to read it. And I think it's not necessarily any easier if you're going the traditionally published route. It's just that going with a traditional publisher, I don't have to do the cover art. I have an editor that I get to work with. I don't have to reach out to do the publicity completely. I still do marketing for myself. I still want to make sure I reach out to every angle and perspective possible so people know about the book. But at least I also have another branch working in that space. And it's also much easier working in traditional publishing to get your book into bookstores, where it's far harder if you're a self published author. So I'm not saying that one is better, but I know that I don't want to do certain things. I don't want to do PR. I don't want to do the cover art. I don't want to edit my book. I've edited a bunch. I want another eye to make it better. And so doing those things with a traditional publisher for me takes that pressure off.
Yes, well said, Mr. Doug. So, what is the most rewarding aspect of being an author?
For me, it's getting those stories out, it's sharing those stories. I'm a storyteller. I don't care how the story comes. If it's in a short story, if it's in a novel, if it's in a song, if it's in a movie, I just want those stories to be out there. I love hearing stories. I love sharing stories. I love collecting stories. So for me to know that other people are engaged with it, and whether they're learning from it or angry at it or something, as long as they're feeling something within it, is what matters most to me.
Yes. So, Mr. Douglas Weissman, can you please invite our listeners to support your upcoming novel, Girl in the Ashes?
Absolutely. Please, you can pre-order it today on Amazon or Barnes& and Noble or bookshop.org, wherever books are sold. Girl in the Ashes. Douglas Weissman has a beautiful cover, I think, personally. But you
Yes.
could also thanks. You could also
Just
visit
like
my website.
just like
Yeah,
one
say
of
it.
the best-selling author, best-selling books.
Right? That's why when I
Yes.
got the preview of the cover, I was over the moon because I thought, just like you, it looks like something that would be on a bestseller list. It looks like something that would
Yes.
be face forward out the window at a bookstore. And so you can also visit my website, douglasweissman.com. I'm very active on LinkedIn as well. If you want to reach out to me, and love to talk books, love to talk writing, love to talk all things creative.
Okay. So, Mr. Douglas, thank you for your time.
No, thank you. I loved it. I really appreciate you having me.
Thank you. And thank you, FacePod, for being the number three best book podcast on the planet. Thank you so much. More to come, people. See you soon.